I tweeted back in answer to this letter. I said that if the New York Times can't tell, comedy from misinformation, here's a hint: misinformation is what's in the paper. Their paper is the joke. So I think that's we have to straighten them out about this. But it is another technique that they use that we should always be calling out their techniques. Is to take, like the joke the kid made about Puerto Rico at the recent Trump rally. Oh, what a horrible thing, as if, that's not a joke. Even Jon Stewart defended a comedian making jokes, even when they're untoward. And that is one of the things that ultimately it makes you come off as humorless. And I think that has happened to the Democrats.
Before we continue, please help the algorithm boost our reporting that asks the questions others won't by liking this video, clicking subscribe, and turning on all notifications. Thanks for supporting the Daily Signal. Now back to the video.
This is Tyler O'Neill, managing editor at The Daily Signal. I am honored to be joined by Andrew Klavan, who is host of The Andrew Klavan Show on the Daily Wire and author, most recently among his many other books, of Woman Underground, which is an excellent mystery that my colleague Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, she's married now, interviewed you on
That's right.
About a week ago. So congrats on the book.
Also,
I'd like to issue you, I think it's congratulations, I'm not sure. The New York Times decided to include you on a list of these conservatives they're attacking for election misinformation. Yes. And they're citing one of the most completely reputable, not biased outlets at all, Media Matters, in essentially doing, and I think your colleague, Ben Shapiro, who's probably more than your colleague, he co-founded the Daily Wire, but he got attacked with this too, and he said that this represents one of the left's October surprises for the election. It's essentially what the New York Times is essentially strong-arming YouTube into cracking down on conservative content creators and conservative journalists and conservative authors like yourself, like Tucker Carlson, like Ben Shapiro. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, and I think it's only part of it, though. Even the threat of being demonetized on YouTube is threatening us directly. It's essentially saying, watch your step, or you may get thrown off YouTube, which of course would be difficult for us and make it hard for us to get the word out and say the things that we want to say to as many people as we want to say them to. So it's both intimidating us and trying to force YouTube's hand, which YouTube may be in league with them for all I know. They do have incredibly weird rules about what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. But it's kind of, it's in one sense it's funny because I don't think anybody is going to intimidate me or Ben Shapiro or Elon Musk or Tucker Carlson, all of whom also got these messages. But on the other hand, there's also a way in which it's not funny at all, because the New York Times is still a major news outlet, and for a major news outlet to try and intimidate people who disagree with them is really quite despicable and against everything the Times is supposed to believe in or used to believe in. They don't obviously believe in that anymore, and it's amazing that, the newspaper that, followed the Russian collusion hoax, which was a dirty trick from Hillary Clinton, and followed it as if it were, in fact, a story, and then received a Pulitzer Prize for that misguided coverage, that they are the ones who think that they should be determining what is misinformation is kind of hilarious. That they should be asking for YouTube to decide what's misinformation is kind of hilarious. And in the letter, they actually quoted something they said was misinformation from me, which was not only a parody, but they mentioned that it was a parody. I start my show with satire, which I think is really good material, and it's obviously kidding. I said something like insects could vote or some crazy thing like that. And they mentioned that it's a joke, and yet they cite it as misinformation, which is in keeping with a left that, all their ideas have failed. All their ideas have turned out to not describe reality or the world, and that's why they've failed. And instead of admitting that and ceding some kind of power or ceding some kind of dignity to the right, who's been telling them that their ideas have failed and that their policies will therefore fail, they want to just shut us down. And that's a kind of an end game, I think, for a philosophy that is now crashing and burning, hopefully for the last time.
Well, and this is coming after we've seen the Twitter files, after we've seen, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg admit in a letter that he had been pressured by the Biden administration to silence those who dissented from the left's, narrative on COVID, on the 2020 election, on climate change. This is something we've seen big tech pressured to censor conservatives. And that's one of the reasons why I thought Ben really hit the nail on the head by saying, we know that these tech companies have yielded to pressure in the past. The New York Times is trying to apply this pressure now, right on the eve of an election. What sort of, if the New York Times is successful in strong-arming YouTube into taking action, what sort of impact do you think that would have on the ability of conservative content creators to get their message out there in these last few days before the election? Do you think that could sway a close election?
It's pretty late in the game, but yes, it certainly could. It might. I mean, YouTube is almost a monopoly. There's just simply no way to compete with YouTube in their, everything is there, and therefore everybody goes on YouTube to get the material there. And they have really, in the past, made it very difficult for them, even though we've approached them about it, we've talked to them about it. Sometimes they sound sympathetic, but they're just rules vary day to day, and there's all kinds of crazy things you find out you're not allowed to say without getting either demonetized or censored. And it's really a difficult thing. I mean, we tell people to come to the Daily Wire where you get everything uncensored, but still YouTube is where everybody is. And so, yeah, it can be quite difficult. And look, this is something they tried last time and it worked. They censored the Hunter Biden laptop story, which was a completely valid October surprise. It turned out everything that was in there and everything the New York Post reported about it turned out to be true. The New York Post was pushed off Twitter, which was then not run by Elon Musk. And consider this also, that when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he instantaneously, and allowed conservatives to speak, he instantaneously went from being an environmental hero who made electric cars to coming under investigation from all sorts of corners of the government. We saw this just the other day when Trump went to McDonald's. I mean, just talk about the pettiness of it. Here was this kind of charming campaign thing where Trump goes to McDonald's, and it was very charming and people liked it. And so they got a letter from three senators led by, McDonald's got a letter from three senators led by Elizabeth Warren, threatening them over their high prices of fast food, as if McDonald's were just setting their prices randomly and somehow gouging people out of money. That's pretty incredible, and it was followed fast on by a story about food poisoning at a McDonald's that had been investigated by the CDC for over a month and suddenly became front page news everywhere. It really is indicative of how badly the left has failed in real life, in real policy, in real effects on the American people, that their only move now is to silence the people, pointing out how badly they failed and why they failed. Because it's not just failure, it's a failure that has to do with not seeing reality properly, which is almost the definition of leftism. And I think the fact that the internet has now given more people voices is just absolutely damaging to them, and what they want to do is silence those voices. Really is reminiscent. I'm not the first person to say this, obviously, but very, very reminiscent of the Reformation, the printing press, people getting burned at the stake for having a translation of the Bible that didn't meet the official translation of the Bible. It's very much like that, and I think the result is going to be the same. I don't think you can stop
Well, it kind of
progress.
reminds me of the propaganda arm that Woodrow Wilson had in his War Socialism. Like, we tend to forget because that's a negative part of our history, and we like to think, oh, we were on the right side defeating the Germans in World War I. But, the president of the United States not only created a vast apparatus to control everything, but also had a propaganda arm where he said that essentially Germans are Huns. And it's this really racist, but this is what the left has done, and he was the model for the progressive state. So Wilson, anyway, I don't want to go too off track. I wanted to ask you, Media Matters. When you see, not only are they attacking you for spreading the misinformation of daring to make a funny parody, which I need to see now because that sounds hilarious, but not only are they doing that, but they're citing and they make no hide it. They don't hide about it. They don't say like, oh, we're going through and checking for misinformation and fact checking ourselves. They say we're outsourcing this fact checking, this determining of what misinformation is, to Media Matters for America, which has a record of absolutely demonizing conservatives across the media. I mean, they've tried to get me fired. I'm sure they've probably tried to get you fired. But like, what do you see what do you think when they're citing this?
Well, this is what made me think that the target was not just YouTube, but was actually the speakers themselves. The New York Times is very smart, and they know exactly what makes conservatives angry, and they love to make conservatives angry because then conservatives say stupid stuff or they, pop off. And I was almost certain that they did that because we have gotten constantly attacked by Media Matters. We constantly laugh at Media Matters and make fun of them. We have never been intimidated by them. We just completely, laugh them off. And they must have cited that to make us upset. I mean, I've seen the Times do this again and again with conservatives. They're really very intelligent in their propaganda because their paper, I always call them a former newspaper because they used to be in the 80s quite a good newspaper. But even though they were left wing, they were a good newspaper. And now they're no longer a paper. They're really just a leftist Pravda kind of propaganda arm. And so this is what made me think that they were really trying to not just hope for YouTube to shut us down, but trying to intimidate the commentators themselves, because we're the only people who know what Media Matters is. They're firing people because nobody's going there, that nobody's paying attention to them. They're cutting staff at Media Matters because they're a laughing stock. So the fact that the New York Times cited them, which can only make them a laughing stock too, meant to me that they were trying to get under our skin and hopefully we would say something untoward. Fortunately, I think Ben and Tucker both said the same thing, which I can't repeat on the air, but I think it was concise. It was, yes. I think, 2 words and concise, and I think it's all that needed to be said.
Well, do you think this echoes, last night we heard what I would think of as the deplorables moment of 2024, where the sitting president of the United States referred to the supporters of the candidate running against his chosen successor as garbage. Yeah. And then his White House immediately tried to say, like, oh, I wasn't talking about the supporters. I was talking about the comments that they had made. And if you actually watch the video, it's very clear he is referring to the supporters. Do you think that ties into the New York Times here at all? I mean, you talk about organizations like Media Matters that people on the right know not to take seriously, but people elsewhere don't. That reminds me of the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think this trend of demonizing conservatives for daring to oppose the leftist elite's agenda is just, out of control. And Biden, New York Times, Media Matters, SPLC, they're all part of that.
Yeah, no, this has been going on since the 1960s. I mean, this is the failure of these policies and the virulent nature of the rhetoric are linked together. As the Great Society welfare programs failed and actually slowed, for instance, black progress up out of the middle class, it became more and more racist for us to criticize those policies because those policies actually put money in the pockets, our money, public money, tax money, into the pockets of Democrat politicians while not helping the poor or changing the ratio of the poor or helping black people or minorities. So you've got a situation where policies are putting money into the pockets of politicians, but actually doing harm to the people they're supposed to help. So they have a very high stake in making it unspeakable to criticize them. It's not just they say, oh, we're defending this policy because it'll work eventually. What they're saying is, you hate this policy, you must hate black people. And that's, because we in America are the least racist country that exists on planet Earth. There is no country that is less racist than this country. We're very sensitive to that accusation, and especially because black people were not well treated many years ago, and we don't want to be part of that. We're very sensitive, and we've had a tendency in the past to be silent. Trump, who's too much of a blustering, loose cannon to be intimidated by that, is their nemesis precisely because he has taught people that you have to talk back no matter what they call you. And that's exactly why they hate him as much as they hate him. I mean, that is exactly the thing that makes him the demon that they say he is. And so, yeah, all of this is, the way I got into commentating was I made a satirical video called Shut Up. And the idea of the video was that everything the left says can be translated into shut up. You're not racist. They just want you to shut up. You're not sexist. It's just shut up. And that video, which has now been around for almost 20 years, is true today, if not truer than it was then. I mean, everything they say, you really have to listen to it to hear it. Everything they say translates in shut up. You can't talk about abortion because you're male, or if you're a female, you're under the sway of males. It's never, here's my argument against your argument. It's always, you can't say that. And so this is just extending that really to, it's not a violation of the First Amendment because it's not the government doing it. It's a violation of the essence of the First Amendment, the spirit of the First Amendment, without which the First Amendment means nothing.
Well, so just to wrap up, I know we're coming close to the time, but would you say, what the New York Times is doing here, is it likely to impact the election, or is it likely to end up, kind of blowing up in their faces?
I'm guessing it's not going to work because it was already done last time. And, what happened to Twitter after they knocked Trump off and they knocked the New York Post off is now Twitter is X. And I think a lot of places understand that as powerful as you are today, tomorrow you can be X'd out. And I think that maybe they'll be a little slower. And on top of that, before they were attacking Trump, where now Kamala Harris, as you can tell by the fact that the Washington Post, USA Today, LA Times won't endorse her, you can see she does not have the sort of following that even a Joe Biden had, but certainly a Barack Obama has. There's not the passionate attraction to her, and not the sense that, we want to violate our integrity to stop this from happening. Trump has already been president. He's not going to be any worse than he was before. If you hated him, he's probably going to be better if you liked him. So I don't really think that there's the same motivation to shut him down. That's why the hysterical idea, he's a Nazi because he went to Madison Square Garden. That's maybe my favorite laugh line of the campaign. As the Nazis held a rally in Madison Square Garden. Trump held a rally in Madison Square Garden. Therefore, he's a Nazi. I thought the way Trump dances so clumsily, they should have compared him to Taylor Swift, but apparently not. That's apparently he's Hitler.
Well, remember when this was supposed to be a joy and vibes election?
Yes. The vibes are gone. The joy is gone. What can I say? But the laughs are still here. They have become so silly, and we can see them now because of the internet. It used to be that they could hide behind their own smokescreen. The smokescreen's gone, so at least we get a laugh out of it.
Well, one last thing, the idea of calling a parody misinformation. It seems like you're the perfect person to ask this question, but how do you respond to that idea that, New York Times and Media Matters here are unleashing against you?
Well, this is also a famous left-wing technique, is taking right-wing jokes seriously. And I tweeted back in answer to this letter, I said that if the New York Times can't tell, comedy from misinformation, here's a hint: misinformation is what's in the paper. Their paper is the joke, So I think that's we have to straighten them out about this. But it is another technique that they use that we should always be calling out their techniques, is to take, like the joke the kid made about Puerto Rico at the recent Trump rally. Oh, what a horrible thing, as if, that's not a joke. Even Jon Stewart defended a comedian making jokes, even when they're untoward. And that is one of the things that ultimately it makes you come off as humorless. And I think that has happened to the Democrats, and they don't really know how to handle it because the culture is everything to them.
Well, thanks so much for joining me on short notice, Andrew. And is there anything else you'd like to add about this or about the election?
I feel optimistic about it, but the polls show it just to be razor's edge. So the one important thing is that you got to get out there and vote. I mean, if you complain, if you rant, if you rave, and you don't vote, you are just a fool, And I think that's true, by the way, even in blue states. First of all, you never know what can happen. And second of all, if Trump wins the popular vote, I think that will be a very, very convincing victory. And I'm hopeful.
Yeah. I recently wrote an article saying that Christians should vote regardless of who you vote for, because, we're part of the ruling authorities. We're the ones who decide who they are. And, we have a a duty to engage.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is if you vote for Kamala, you go to hell for all eternity. I think that's in the Bible. I may not be remembering that.
Oh, well, thank you again so much, Andrew, for joining me. Again, your book is
A Woman Underground.
Woman Underground, yes.
And it's getting great reviews, and I hope people will go out and buy it because I think these things are so much more important than conservatives know. Really good novels that sell, really good movies that people go to. They rule the culture, and the culture rules politics. So I hope people get it. They will like it too. So it's not just a political move.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.